All right. Well, folks,
Well
good to
said.
see everybody again. Lots to discuss as usual. For our top news story, the world's top banks show minimal commitments to shifting away from fossil fuel. In technology, here is a potential breakthrough for production of superior battery technology. On waste and the environment, world leaders have agreed apparently to draw up a historic treaty on plastic waste. On materials, there's a lot of progress and prospects in magnetic topological materials. And we'll ask Richard what he's talking about. In flight and space, astronomers have revealed an incredible map of 4.4 million galaxies. In animals and biology and us, new research shows pets can sustain your brain.
I got you.
For humans, there's now a genealogy for all of us. The University of Oxford researchers have created the largest ever human family tree. And a thing that Richard was saying, now how are people going to react? Apparently, meat eating can extend human life expectancy worldwide. Aha. So that's what we'll talk about. And Richard, tell us about the top story that the world's top banks don't have much commitment to shifting financing away from fossil fuels.
Now, big banking is saying not very much on how they're going to actually combat climate change through the world financing that they do. And the top 10 banks were studied very carefully, looking at their financial statements and annual reports. And while they're talking more now about climate change, the analysis of the reports doesn't show much that they're actually doing. So their actions are vague, the talk is big. And the banks, of course, are contributing significant amounts of money for financial support for fossil fuels, and they've been doing that all along, and they're still doing it. And the absence of commitments, they're saying, may reflect an absence of critical reflection on their responsibility for financing climate change. And the author of the article says what is needed are effective policies targeting the banking industry, and they need to explicitly consider how to measure and reduce climate impacts not only for their own direct operations, but also in relation to the bank's financing operation of client lending. And the emerging pattern in the annual reports is the focus on talk about the elements of climate change, but very little discussion on how climate change might affect the banks in relation to their impact of society. Uh, they do now talk about climate risks, so they know about that, and they talk about a recognition that climate change regulations may affect how they work. And they also talk about climate change in another way in terms of trying to sell opportunities for investment, like in green products and services. What they don't seem to be doing is addressing the causal negative contributions that they have and continue to have on financing industries that have a negative impact on clients. So I don't know who is surprised. The banks are more interested in finding new ways to get their clients to invest rather than trying to control or limit their own investments in polluting industries.
Any thoughts?
Well, I am not surprised. In a capitalist system, the bank is responsible to their shareholders. They're in it to make money. They're looking at the bottom line, and we really shouldn't expect anything different than that. They need to be regulated or enticed to make changes. They're not going to do it on their own. They don't have a conscience. There are exceptions, but in general.
There was a time in the US until the 1980s where it was considered that corporations also had a social responsibility. But then when the greed is good generation happened, then that went out the window. And shareholder return became the watchword.
Well, there are cases where, for example, if you're investing in mutual funds, you can invest in mutual funds with a social responsibility. Maybe that could be carried over if you're investing in banks. That's similar.
You know, while that's true, and I agree, I've tried to invest in responsible companies, but you know, it's hard to do that when you're thinking of the bottom line yourself. I mean, you vote with your wallet usually, and I still think it's the government's responsibility to reward or punish as necessary to get them to do the right thing.
Well, doesn't the government make laws, the laws that allow corporations to exist?
Absolutely. And they're
So
people.
maybe the government has some way to do it if they want to.
You got to get it through Congress.
And governments have to balance the needs of the noisy environmentalists with those of employees and blue collar workers and everyone else. And they know that this switch to alternative energy cannot happen overnight. So it has to go slow. It can't go fast.
It's a complicated issue. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
It is.
But it would be interesting too to know one of the ways that governments do support alternative energy is by subsidizing the purchase of electricity from wind farms and solar farms and stuff like that, and that then consumers basically pay for that in higher energy prices and so on. So we're all paying for it, and it'll all happen, just won't happen as fast as people would like.
You're right, Andrew. We were looking at an EV automobile, and you can get a $7,500 rebate from the government and to buy a new EV in the US. And that is the way the government tries to get people to do the right thing. So it's no skin off the test. Well, actually, Tesla doesn't qualify anymore because they've exceeded a number, but most other EVs still do.
The problem is that if you live in Ohio, when you register your car, they charge you extra because they say you don't pay the taxes you would if you had fuel.
So they're being responsible.
The answer to that is don't live in Ohio.
Isn't there a cost to the taxpayer with all of these subsidies to fossil fuels?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're paying more for things because of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The government has to
The worldwide
Government or
subsidies
borrow
to
the money.
fossil fuels, I think, are in the trillions of dollars a year.
Yeah,
This
they're
is a really
subsidized.
cynical comment, but it seems as though, and this was a comment in an autobiography about somebody going to Harvard Law School, that what he came away with was realizing it's the rich and powerful who make the laws designed to be advantageous to the rich and powerful, not the general public.
Mhm.
Well, Richard, tell us about technology. What's about the breakthrough on battery technology?
Now, there are two parts of this. The first part is still with the development of supercapacitors as alternatives for batteries. And the thing about supercapacitors is they will change the way we use batteries because they make it where they charge faster and they make a much longer lifespan of the batteries. And they're working on making them smaller and tiny micro supercapacitors, and this is going to impact everything from smartphone to electric cars. And researchers at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden have now developed a method that is a breakthrough about how you can make these superconductors and integrate them, these supercapacitors, integrate them into integrated circuits made using CMOS, and CMOS is the kind of semiconductor technology that is still the most common in the world. And they developed a technique that you can use existing technology, existing equipment, and then start adding these tiny supercapacitors within the integrated circuit so it has its own power source and is able to operate more independently of central power issues. And they think it's going to be one of the things that helps the next generation of integrated circuit technology. And what they are doing is, again, making these supercapacitors so small that they can be put on a chip and really make a complete system on a chip that has all of the circuitry needed and the power source you need to operate it right there on the chip. And to do it, they're using an existing technology that I heard about when I was in the semiconductor business. It's called spin coating. I heard of them as spinners. I didn't know what they were doing. I just knew they spin. So they're making a coating. And this method is scalable and will end up resulting in reduced costs for the manufacturer and is a big step forward in the application of micro supercapacitors in everyday electronics. So,
Any
who's
thoughts?
excited about that?
Any thoughts?
Now, I have to
Well,
say, part of my professional background, I spent several years as a marketing manager in a high-tech power supply company, and I learned that all of this technology we use depends upon power, and so I am more sensitive to this than perhaps you guys are.
I was going to suggest Elon Musk would be very excited.
He wants big power, though.
Elon Musk Tesla bought Maxwell, which is the dominant force in supercapacitors. And Tesla held it for a year or two, but I think they've subsequently divested.
And again, this is a different scale of supercapacitors. These are supercapacitors on the chip.
So Richard, tell us about this treaty on plastic waste.
Well, we have a lot of waste, and maybe eventually we'll do something about it. World leaders, environmental ministers, and people like that from 173 different countries have agreed to develop a legally binding treaty on plastic, and this is a truly historic development. It's the equivalent of the first climate agreement that was made in the Paris Agreement in 2015, but for plastic. And this, what they have agreed to do in the next 2 years is to create an international treaty that covers the full life cycle of plastics from production to disposal. And if you look at the problem, then uh, between 1950 and 2017, there was a little more than 9 billion tons of plastic produced, and about 7 billion tons of that has basically gone into the waste stream, either stored in landfills or on the ground somewhere or in the ocean. And pollution has grown into an epidemic. And with this resolution, now we are officially on track for a cure. And this agreement is seen as, quote, triumph by the planet Earth over single-use plastics. And so to me, it is very positive, and it's important that they're going to cover the production and design of plastic and not just deal with waste. And it's like they finally recognize that to control plastic waste, you have to control plastic production too before it becomes waste. And it is, I think, particularly significant that this resolution now has provisions that for the first time ever recognizes waste pickers as an issue that needs to be dealt with. These are the low paid workers in developing nations who scavenge for recyclable plastic and other goods, and now for the first time they're recognized in an environmental resolution. And here is another quote here from the director of the WWF International. He says, "We stand at a crossroads in history when ambitious decisions taken today can prevent plastic pollution from contributing to our planet's ecosystem collapse." So, this resolution finally recognizes that we can't begin to address plastic in our ocean and land without intervening at the source. And fundamentally, the plastic tap must be turned off if we're ever serious about tackling the problem. So we will see how this goes. This is a major step It's an agreement of 173 countries that plastic is a problem, and they're going to hammer out a binding treaty to be able to start to try to limit it.
Any thoughts?
Yes, a couple of years ago, they found that there's a big sort of island on the Pacific, larger than Texas, which has a lot of plastic waste. And they are developing methods to catch that on the surface. But there's microparticles of plastic that have sunk to the bottom and is already in the food chain. So there's a lot of work to be done yet.
Yes, there's also a patch like that in the Atlantic too.
I think 5 of them around the world. And apparently we're all eating microplastics in the food we eat and the water we drink.
Mhm.
And it's scary.
And what do we know about the health impacts of microplastics? That's right. That's what we know. That's right.
I just hope this is
I'd be
more
interested
effective than the
if
climate agreement.
Me too. But at least it's
sounds pretty exciting to find out how it's becomes legally binding for some countries that aren't too cooperative that might sign it anyway.
uh-huh. Well, again,
Interestingly enough, a lot of the gyre that Johannes was talking about in the Pacific, a lot of it comes from the Philippines, in as much as it's an impoverished country. They buy things in very small packages, plastic packages. They all live very
yes,
close
yes.
to waterways. There are very few landfills because of the regulations, because of the volcanic nature of the, so they
Yes.
contribute far more to the plastic in the ocean than first world countries do, which surprised me.
Since I lived in India, I know about what you mean about the small things in plastic packages that you can get at these little neighborhood shops.
Get that in Mexico too.
Yes.
Well, why don't they just tax the plastic at the manufacturing source, and that would drive up the price and reduce the usage?
Reduce demand.
That would be a reasonable thing to do. There also are plastics that are being developed now that are recyclable, and you would use a different tax on those to encourage their use.
The recyclable plastics available at the moment just break down into smaller bits of plastic. So that's not exactly an
But
advantage.
there are plastics that are certainly in the development cycle, and I think close to being available, that you can put, for example, in an acid bath and break the polymers down into monomers, and then can recombine the monomers to make whatever kind of polymer you want to make. So there is a big revolution that is underway in terms of how we are able to make and recycle plastics.
When we talk about small packages, where are those produced? Are they mainly in richer countries, or is the production of these plastics everywhere?
I don't know. I suspect the things that we saw in India, the most common form of that were little plastic kind of envelopes that would have just some small bit of a savory or something that you would eat, for example, but it's like metallized plastic envelopes, and I don't know where they're made. It wouldn't surprise me to find out Monsanto was behind it somewhere.
Well, Richard, if we're moving on to
Sorry
materials,
to interrupt one show and tell. Anybody
Yes.
have cats? I can't buy food for the cats here, canned food. It only
Right.
comes in plastic packages.
Right. That's exactly the kind of problem. Now imagine those things that are just little tiny ones, and you have what in India they would come in a roll where you'd pull down three from the roll and rip it off.
We found cat food in cans. We're trying to remember where. Maybe it was Torito and maybe it was at the, no, it wasn't there. Or maybe it was at the place on Javier Mina. We can be in touch by email.
I believe your cats are willing to eat fish. Our cats are like, what? Turkey? I only eat chicken. What's the matter with you, lady?
You can get them on.
Or I ate that yesterday. What do you mean? I'm supposed to eat it today? Anyway,
Richard, on materials, what's this about magnetic topological materials?
Well, this is, I think, very cool. The we know that these two-dimensional materials have interesting effects because their electrons line up in defined patterns. And when you put one sheet on top of another sheet and twist it at the right angle, it creates funny quantum effects that are not normally properties of the material. And these quantum effects include uh, things like becoming magnetic. It turns out another way that you can affect the uh, pattern of these electrons is by taking the material and bending it and putting it in little sheets and putting it in hills and valleys and things like this. These are arranging it in different topological manners, and that also changes the patterns of the electrons and then changes or creates quantum effects. And one of the things that they have found is that you do it correctly, and then you make these little localized topological magnetic structures that you're combining the shape of it with the spin of the electrons, and it ends up doing unexpected things. And so here they've found that they can make now these magnetic topological materials can make things like Hall sensors, and the Hall effect is something in magnetics where you have a current running this way, and then the Hall sensor will give you a response that is proportional to the current running through it, and you can use this response in way to be able to do switching and to control things in circuits and stuff like this. And so what they have found is another way to use these 2D materials to make something that will turn out to be very useful in this kind of next generation or two generations away microelectronics, where you're starting to make circuits at the molecule level, and they can get it to do things that you could not imagine before. And they say the advantage of this particular technology in computing functions is the way we do it now, everything has a little bit of power loss, and you can use this effect and make circuits, they believe, that have little or no power loss. So all of the uh, energy things, circuits, can become cooler and more efficient. They also believe they can use this to make new kinds of catalysts, for example, and find a new, highly efficient way to be able to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. And it may be that the topological magnetic effects will be the key technology in generating hydrogen for green transportation, for example. So this is another case of a new material making new technologies and capabilities possible.
Any thoughts?
I'll give an A to anyone who has a thought on this.
No takers, eh?
Bonked. Okay.
All right, moving on and on to astronomy. What's this about an incredible map they've done of 4.4 million galaxies?
That's a lot of galaxies. Here, let me show you a picture. I can't find it. Let me try again. It's there. I have the picture here. Why can't I see it? Okay. Let me try again. Okay, here we are. Here we are. Just look at this picture and you see all of those specks of dust in the picture. Uh, those are all galaxies. They're not specks of dust. And there's a lot of them. Here's a picture where, oops, wrong way. That's not a galaxy. This is some cluster of not of stars, but of galaxies. This is a cluster of galaxy with 1,000 galaxies that are a part of it. And so what they have found is a lot of stuff. And if you look at it, what they were able to find using a instrument that I hadn't heard of, which is a low frequency array tool, and they were able to study just a quarter of the northern hemisphere, and they found 4.4 million of these objects, and most of these objects that they found are things like galaxies with black holes in the middle, or galaxies that are busy growing new stars, or things like this. And uh, they, if you do the math, 4.4 million objects in an eighth of the sky means that altogether then maybe there are 35 million galaxies, and I think a galaxy typically has something like, what, 100 million stars in it. So uh, that is, kind of gives you an idea how much stuff there is out there. They're actually really excited about what they're able to find with these new tools and new way of looking at it. And uh, one of the astronomers who works in the project says, quote, "This project is so exciting to work on. Each time we create a map, our screens are filled with new discoveries and new objects that have never been seen before by human beings." And so these tools are letting us get a better idea of what is around us. And there is so much stuff around us that it's unimaginable, but now we're starting to get new ways to imagine it.
Any thoughts?
I think it's still unimaginable. I figured out it would be about 18 trillion planets.
Uh-huh. That's a lot of planets.
That's a lot of planets. You know,
Uh,
there's going to be life on some of those.
right. We hope there's life on one of them.
Yeah, future life.
Yes.
Richard, I find this astounding. But on the other hand, and Chad maybe commented on it, at another level, I would say, so what? What's the importance of all this for us? How do we grapple with that?
Well, one of the things that happens in astronomy is we're able to find out more about fundamental physics than we can find on this planet, because one of the things that happens in these stars as they clump together and things like that, they generate higher amounts of energy than you can imagine. And what we find out from trying to study the energy and figure out what it is it's one of the ways that is the real frontier of physics. We can't find this out with any way on this planet. So helping study the universe in this way is helping us to understand physics. Now, what's the advantage of understanding physics? I don't know. What did we get from it? Let's see, we got gravities, motor, electricity, semiconductors, EVs, computers are some of the things we've had so far. We have the glasses that you're wearing on your face, Fred.
And
And
we've
this,
got climate change and all sorts of things.
that's right. There are some good things and some things that are problematic. Also, we don't have it yet, but we had for a while and still have the potential of destruction of all life on the planet by our using special energy devices called bombs.
Well, Richard, if there's no hope there, or maybe there is, how about the hope that we get from pets about sustaining your brain? Are you into it?
Well, it makes me think about, it made me think about, do I want the responsibility of having a dog that I have to walk twice a day? But here, this story starts with a story, and the author talks about a colleague of his who, uh, in the morning, he has a routine starting out as he goes to work. And first, as he's going out the door, he says, "See you later" to his wife, and then gives his beagle a rub and a kiss. And it turns out his wife said, "Wait a minute. We've been married 25 years, raised 3 kids, and the dog gets a kiss?" And he says, my friend thought about it for a second or two and then replied, "I love that damn dog." And anyway, so it's no secret that pets give us a wide variety of benefits, and we know about some of them, which are improved mood and better general quality of life and overall health. But this new research also shows that long-term ownership of a pet uh, slows the cognitive decline in old age. I think that's the age that we're in now. And this was a large scale study that was done of Medicare beneficiaries, and they studied the general ones against people caring for pets. And they saw that people caring for pets experienced slower cognitive decline over the 6 year period of the test. They followed these about 1,300 people for 6 years and gave them studies every year evaluating their mental capability, etc. And the evidence shows that long term pet ownership provides a buffer against cognitive disease. And uh, they also found that there's some benefits for pet owners with hypertension. That was a small benefit, 44% versus 49%, but they found there's a greater likelihood that pet owners are depressed. And I don't think that's because they're pet owners. Maybe if you're depressed, you're more likely to own a pet. I don't know why that is, but they did find uh, that pet owners were more likely to be depressed, 24% versus 14%. So I don't know why your cat must be depressing you with all the different food that they want, I guess,
Any thoughts?
Susan. But
Yes, you can also get anxiety when you have a pet. We
uh,
brought our cat from United States to Mexico, and we said,
okay,
we're not
and
going to take it back. So we had real anxiety. What are we going to do with the cat? We're in the state and the cat is here.
yes,
Fortunately, it ended well. We have a neighbor who's taking care of
That's
it.
good. Okay. The cats can keep your cognitive facilities working because they hide all over the place and you have to look be very about where you look with them.
that's for cats. Anyway, so they did find though that long-term pet owners had better cognitive scores overall. So they showed a benefit of 1.8 points. They didn't say what the point scale was, so I don't know what that means. They also, interestingly enough, found that the benefits were greater for black adults, college educated, and men are the ones that get the most benefit. They say they need to do further research to explore why the benefits existed. Some of the mechanisms that they think are involved. First, of course, if you have a dog, there's increased physical activity, uh, and then with all kind of pets, there is a chronic stress reduction. Both of those things have real mental benefits. Interestingly enough, the study authors uh, suggest that pet ownership should not be applied like a therapeutic intervention. And what they were the most interested in because of this study was doing things to make it easier for especially low income people to be able to live in a place where they're able to keep their pet. Not having a pet and not being able to keep it has a real negative impact. And in a lot of places, if you have low income and are renting in the kind of programs available, there either pets are not allowed or there is a pet fee. And the people who did this study want to make it easier for the people who want to have a pet to be able to live with them as a public health issue.
Any thoughts?
This is part of a huge body of research in veterinary medicine. things such as people recovering from heart attacks, if they have a pet, they recover much faster than people who don't have pets. Pets require routine, and routine is very important. It's been suggested that people with routines live longer, even if it's a bad routine, like eating ice cream every night or having a scotch with your dinner every night. Those are the people who are more likely to live over 100. So there's a huge body of research. And of course, veterinary medicine is very keen to look at all the positive aspects of pet ownership. The other aspect I wonder about is that whether you have to have a certain socioeconomic level to be able to afford to have, you know, the place where you, as you say, where you can keep the pet, where the pet's allowed, or the space to have a pet. Whether it skews to people who are, you know, more likely to be able to, I don't know, see the dentist and
Right.
have better health for other reasons.
That certainly could be a factor. I didn't see any statistics about distribution of pets versus distribution of income.
Well, it's the old business about correlation is not necessarily causation.
Right.
And
Absolutely. That's why they're saying we found out this interesting tidbit. Now we have to figure out what's going on.
So Richard, tell us about Oxford research on a huge human family tree.
Well, we all know we're here and we all know we're related somehow. And uh, what, you know, the last 20 years has actually been an amazing period, extraordinary in terms of human genetic research. And we've been able to not only generate genomic data for hundreds of thousands of people, but also thousands of people from prehistoric remains that were left from 1,000 years old to 100,000 years old. And what uh, the researchers were able to do is figure out how to put them all together in a giant database and use these multiple sources of this genetic data and to be able to scale up and handle these thousands and potentially millions of genetic sequences and then connect them all together. And basically, they have built up from this work a huge family tree, a genealogy for all of humanity that uh, models not only our genetic makeup right now, but our history that was connected with it. And what they are able to reconstruct from this is, among other things, uh, patterns of ancestors and identify unknown ancestor groups from the genetic data. They're looking at the pattern and there's something missing in the pattern and they can connect that to an unknown genetic group. They're also able to connect the genetic groups to locations and have a way to look at humans and their migrations through time. This information already, one of the things they've done through this is get a much better idea of the migrations of Homo sapiens out of Africa, for example, and are able to use the genetic map as a way to infer the physical map of that migration. And the data that they're working with uh, included the data from almost 4,000 individuals from 215 populations, and they still had samples of prehistoric people dating from 1,000 years ago to 100,000 years ago. And again, they were able to predict common ancestors and the locations where they had been. And uh, they say when they have made further headway, they're going to have a more accurate uh, tree of all of human life and to be able to eventually generate a single unified map that explains the descents of all human variation that we see today. This method also can be used for other living things, or if we're interested in doing it on dogs or cats or donkeys or elephants, we can. And they're saying it could be particularly useful in medical genetic research because this might give us a way to be able to look at the genetic issues that become medical issues. So it's now a way in which we've been able to use our new genetic sequencing technologies that we've had for the last 20 years together with the new supercomputers and be able to map the human genetics much more thoroughly than we've ever been able to do before and create a new set of tools.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, the interesting part is that business of handling the great, huge quantities of data that they have available now and being able to make sense out of it. But another interesting item in the article was they said that in just 1,000 years, you would have enough generations to have over 1 billion ancestors. Yet
Oh my goodness.
coming out of England, say, or wherever, there were less than 1 million people in the whole country. So there must have been a few kissing cousins in the group to
Uh-huh.
arrive at where we are with so few ancestors.
Well, Richard, for our last story that I expect a lot of us found, now what's this all about? Does meat eating extend human life expectancy? I thought we've been told so much about blue zones and all that kind of thing. Talk about it.
Well, the question that they're trying to deal with is, has eating meat become unfairly demonized as bad for your health? We've certainly all, I believe, heard about this, and the researchers wanted to look more closely at research that has thrown this kind of negative view on meat consumption in the human diet. And they say if you're looking only at correlations of meat consumption and health or life expectancy within a particular group, this can lead to misleading conclusions. So, what they did is they more broadly analyzed correlations between meat eating and life expectancy and child mortality at global and regional levels. This way, you get out of the local study bias and it makes the data more representative of the general health effects of meat eating. And so they examined the overall health effects of total meat consumption in more than 170 countries around the world. So it's got a pretty substantial base. And what they found was that consumption of energy from carbohydrate crops, grains and tubers basically, does not lead to greater life expectancy, and that total meat consumption correlates well to greater life expectancy, independent of the competing effects of total calorie intake, economic influence, urban advantages, and obesity. So, independent of all of those factors, they found a correlation between how much meat they ate and life expectancy. And they say humans have adapted to meat eating for more than the last 2 million years, and our evolution with that nutrition has developed physiological adaptations to eating meat, and we've inherited those adaptations. And now they do say that studies in some populations in developed countries have associated meat-free vegetarian and vegan diets with improved health. And they don't deny those studies. They say, though, if you look at these studies, they are really of wealthy, highly educated communities that have the information and the purchasing power to select plant-based diets that are completely nutritious and provide the nutrients normally contained in meat. And so essentially they've replaced the meat with all the same nutrition that meat provides. This is not something that we can do in every place all over the world. It requires money and it requires knowledge. And, before agriculture was introduced 10,000 years ago, meat was a staple food in the human diet. And uh, meat has, in addition to whatever calories that you're getting from meat, meat has contributing factors that contribute to our overall health, just beyond the number of calories consumed. And without meat in our diet, we may not thrive. So their conclusion is that meat eating is beneficial to human health, provided that it's consumed in moderation and the meat industry is conducted in an ethical way.
Any thoughts?
Yes, I think the lesson here is the longer you live, what used to be bad for you now is good for you.
I would like to know who financed this.
Yeah.
Is this like when the sugar industry was worried that they were going to be slapped, that they managed to say, oh no, it's fats that are the problem?
Well, it was the University of Adelaide, which admittedly is probably a public university, which is in a country that is heavily meat producing, right?
Right, right.
But I don't have any quibble really with the real conclusions of the article that is talking worldwide, which means spread out those statistics. But I have really some quibbles with the way that the research is being reported. I mean, you have to go all the way down to like at least through 7/8 of the article, or maybe even 15/16 of the article, before you come across the word moderation.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Really.
Well, and another interesting, did they put all meat together, meaning that there's good correlation between certain ways of processing meat, whereas perhaps in some of these countries, it's not processed that way.
Sure, sure. they glossed over all of that detail to be able to make the study. So it's a high level study, and the high level study uses a lot of aggregation. And when you aggregate the data together, you lose a lot of your ability to discriminate.
Presumably chicken and beef are meat. How about fish?
Fish or meat, I'm sure they counted it as meat.
It's
But
interesting
again,
too.
go ahead, please, Andrew.
Oh, if anyone chooses to Google Alan Savory, he's the fellow, he's a Rhodesian agriculturalist that was able to show that grazing cattle actually improves the soil and pushes back the desertification and all this sort of stuff. So there's lots of arguments to support eating meat in moderation to improve the planet.
Right. And certainly that's true. The uh, patterns of good sustainable agriculture that I've read about include then animal husbandry as a component of it to do just exactly what you're talking about, Andrew, build the soil.
Well, thanks, Richard. Good talks today, and thanks to everybody for participating. And once again, we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.
Bye. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Richard.
Adios. Good to
Everybody.
see you.
Bye-bye and thank you.
Bye bye.